Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapellos in Ottawa on this Monday. Tonight, the Prime Minister heads to the UN and recognizes a Palestinian state.
The possibility, in absolute violation of the UN Charter and in absolute violation of international law, of self-determination for the Palestinian peoples is being erased.
Canada joins some allies at the United Nations in officially recognizing Palestine for the first time. What tangibly changes now? Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand will join me from New York in moments, and I'll ask her. Then, the Public Safety Minister in the hot seat.
That minister did have a real conversation about guns. Unfortunately for him, he was caught on tape.
It's a good thing there's a recording of it so that Canadians can have a look for themselves.
Minister Gary Anandasangari on the defense after leaked audio reveals the feds may be pushing ahead with the gun buyback program because of political pressure in Quebec. Our front bench with Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie is coming up to unpack the fallout. Plus, Trump trade strategy session.
This is not a transition, this is a rupture. This is a sharp change in a short period of time, driven by a variety of factors. We have a determination to rise up and meet this.
The review process for the North American Free Trade Agreement is officially underway. What's Canada's best strategy for success? We've got a great panel with Derek Burney, who negotiated the original NAFTA, and Brian Clow, who negotiated the current deal. That's coming up a little bit later on in the show. First, though.
We're under no illusions that this is any sort of panacea. But it's necessary, in our judgment, and the judgment of most other countries in the world, that we have to push on this now because, as I say, the possibility, in absolute violation of the UN Charter and in absolute violation of international law, of self-determination for the Palestinian peoples is being erased.
We're going to start tonight at the United Nations in New York City. World leaders are gathered for the General Assembly, including Prime Minister Mark Carney, who is making the trip, as you heard there, just as he declares Canada's recognition of a Palestinian state. The feds here made the announcement in concert with the UK and Australia. France today took the same position. The White House is criticizing the move.
As for all of these Western nations that are recognizing a Palestinian state, the president has been very clear. He disagrees with this decision. He spoke about that in the UK, standing right next to his friend, Prime Minister Starmer. And he feels this does not do anything to release the hostages, which is the primary goal right now in Gaza, does nothing to end this conflict and bring this war to a close. And frankly, he believes it's a reward to Hamas. So he believes these decisions are just more talk and not enough action.
In the Prime Minister's initial statement recognizing a Palestinian state, he accused the Israeli government of working to, quote, prevent the prospect of a Palestinian state from ever being established. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the collective recognition of the Palestinian state an endorsement of Hamas-led terrorism.
זה לא יהיה. לא תקום מדינה פלסטינית ממערב לירדן.
Netanyahu saying over the weekend that the move endangers Israel's existence and that, quote, there will be no Palestinian state. Anita Anand is Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister. She's with the Prime Minister in New York. Hi, Minister. Good to have you on the program. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thanks for having me, Vashi.
Minister, what tangibly changes with the recognition of Palestinian statehood?
I want to stress that Canadian foreign policy actually has multiple prongs. Recognition of the State of Israel is one of them. Ensuring that more humanitarian aid reaches those who are dying and suffering in Gaza is another. Ensuring that we have peace in the Middle East overall, and we're doing what we can to support the peace process is yet another. I spoke with Secretary Rubio last night regarding peace plans for the Middle East, and I want to say that at a dinner last night with leaders from the Middle East and beyond, what I stressed is that there are now multiple peace plans on the table, one from the United States, one from the Arab countries, one from the United Kingdom with its 8-point peace plan. And in order for collective action to be powerful and meaningful, we need to land on a peace plan that we can all support so that we can strive and achieve peace in the Middle East, where Palestinians and Israelis can live side by side. And lastly, I'd like to stress that our foreign policy, especially in terms of recognition, is aimed at achieving peace, and it is directed at the State of Israel, not the Israeli people themselves.
So, Minister, I'll rephrase the question. Is it your argument right now that the declaration of a Palestinian state, or the explicit support of a Palestinian state, will advance the goal of peace? Because I would signal back to, for example, earlier this summer, when your government and others decided to signal that this would be on the table. In fact, everything that's happened since is actually an expansion of Israel's actions in Gaza and on civilians in Gaza, not a contraction. So again, I'm going to ask you, what tangibly changes with this decision, which, yes, is consistent with a two-state policy, but is discernibly different from the position we had a week ago?
Vashi, we are acting with many like-minded countries, the UK, France, and Australia, for example. I'll be meeting with my G7 colleagues tonight to discuss this issue. And what we are seeing is a convergence on the international stage amongst countries who are all in favor of a two-state solution, with some notable exceptions. And that collective pressure is what is very important at this time. And I'd like to stress that we will continue to work through these very difficult issues. Your question again was, well, what has tangibly changed? The recognition of two states is just one aspect of a very complex policy makeup. And there are other actions that the Israeli government is taking. For example, expansion in the West Bank. For example, with regards to extremist settlers. For example, with methodically sanctioning the removal of the possibility of a state of Palestine, which made this moment very important for the government of Canada, because the viability of a two-state solution is indeed eroding before our very eyes.
But do you think the collective pressure that you allude to, that you seem to reference, like that all these countries get together, make this declaration, that amounts to collective pressure? Do you have any evidence to believe that that will actually change the position of Israel? Again, I'll point to when you signaled a number of months ago that this was coming. It's not like Benjamin Netanyahu dramatically changed what he was doing and started, started doing less in that vein. In fact, the Israeli, efforts in Gaza essentially expanded at that time. This is just you saying something. If truly you believed Israel was in contravention of international law, if, as you wrote, it was working methodically to prevent the prospect of a Palestinian state from ever being established, wouldn't you attach, for example, something coercive to this declaration like sanctions?
Well, this is a very complex question, Vashi, and I need to break it down. On the first part, relating to the tangible effects and the efficacy of collective action, the global community is rallying around this particular policy approach in record numbers, and it is important because there is a view now, especially right here at the United Nations, that this is a moment in time where the global community needs to come together to recognize the state of Palestine. We have over 140 countries now that have recognized the state of Palestine so that Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace and security side by side. Will that be achieved tomorrow? No. Will that be achieved in the medium to long term? That is what we are working towards. I've been deeply engaged with the Palestinian Authority. I just spoke with President Abbas a few days ago, and I'm in weekly contact with my counterpart of the Palestinian Authority. And we have stressed over and over that the hostages need to be released. Hamas has to lay down its weapons and can have no role in the future governance of Palestine, and that democratic reforms must take place as promised in the Abbas letter. This morning I spoke with my Australian counterpart and my UK counterpart, and we are going to work together to ensure that that pressure is maintained on the Palestinian Authority. As well, we are working with Arab states, many of whom are of the view that this is the moment for us to come together to ensure that recognition also leads to greater steps in the peace process overall. So, Vashi, in answer to your question, this may not happen tomorrow, but these steps along the way, this step-by-step approach is extremely important. International diplomacy is complicated, and we are making sure that we are following the step-by-step approach that is needed in order to ensure that peace in the Middle East will be achieved.
Minister, though, with all due respect, what happens if it doesn't? And when you reference, for example, the Palestinian Authority, why do you have faith that they will be able to do what they have never been able to do? That they, at this moment in time, have no governing authority over, or inside rather, Gaza. They have not held elections since 2006. They have not in any way been able to eradicate Hamas. Like, what if this doesn't lead to peace? What are you going to do then? What are you going to tell all the Jewish people in this country who say this is essentially a vote for terrorism?
Well, to be clear, this is not a vote for terrorism. Hamas can have no role in the future governance of Palestine. Hamas is a terrorist entity under the governing law in Canada. Hamas must lay down its weapons, and Palestine must be demilitarized. In addition, the Palestinian Authority, which is a body that is committing to democratic reforms, will continue to be supported by the international community, including by Canada. We have put support behind the Palestinian Authority, and as I said, that work is ongoing. And I further emphasize that diplomatic relations will not be normalized until we can be assured that the Palestinian Authority is able to make good on its promises. So we are clear-eyed about the steps that are in front of us. We know that there is a road that must be traveled, not just amongst collective like-minded countries, but also by the Palestinian authorities itself. And we will continue to ensure that we are placing that pressure on the Palestinian Authority, that diplomatic relations will not be normalized unless and until we see that there has been progress made towards those democratic reforms laid out in the Abbas letter, and that there is, of course, no role for Hamas at all.
I'll leave it on that note, Minister. I appreciate your time as always. Thank you. Safe travels.
Thank you so much.
That's Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand. And we're actually going to swing right back to the United Nations because Prime Minister Mark Carney has just stepped up to the podium to address a grouping of countries who have assembled at the invitation of Saudi Arabia and France to discuss the question of Palestinian statehood. Let's take a listen in live.
Terroriser le peuple israélien et opprimer le peuple de Gaza, ce qui a engendré d'horribles souffrances. Le Hamas doit impérativement libérer tous les otages.
Must release all hostages, fully lay down its weapons, and play no role in the future governance of Palestine.
Hamas has stolen from the Palestinian people, chased them, and cheated them from their life and liberty, and it can in no way dictate their future. But, Excellencies, the current Israeli government is working methodically to prevent the prospect of a Palestinian state from ever being established. Il poursuit sans relâche l'expansion des colonies
It is relentlessly pursuing the expansion of the West Bank economy, which is illegal under international law. Its constant attacks in Gaza has left tens of thousands of dead civilians and forced the displacement of over 1 million people and caused devastating famine. Yet another violation of international law.
And it is now the avowed policy of the current Israeli government that there will be, and I quote, no Palestinian state. In this context, Canada recognizes the State of Palestine and we offer our full partnership in building the promise of a peaceful future for both the State of Palestine and the State of Israel. Excellencies, Canada is under no illusions that this recognition is a panacea. This recognition is, however, firmly aligned with the principles of self-determination and fundamental human rights in the UN Charter, and it is fundamentally consistent with the policy of the Canadian government for generations. We take this action as part of a coordinated effort led by France and Saudi Arabia, a coordinated effort to provide the possibility of peace and a two-state solution.
That is Prime Minister Mark Carney addressing a conference on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. If I recall correctly, word for word, basically what we heard him deliver in those remarks is identical to the statement that was released by himself and the federal government on Sunday, recognizing Palestinian statehood. You heard him there lay out his reasons. Certainly, Israel has countered both those claims and the ones made by the UK and France and Australia, other countries that alongside Canada made this declaration of recognizing the Palestinian state. But those remarks will continue for a little while. We'll continue monitoring them as well on our side and convey to you anything new that comes from them. That's not the UNGA, the General Assembly. That's just on the sidelines. It's a conference held by France and Saudi Arabia. A number of different leaders are addressing the conference, and you could see Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand there standing up and delivering some applause to the Prime Minister once he proclaimed that Canada would recognize a Palestinian state. We're going to take a quick break here on Power Play. Lots more coverage of that and other stories on the other end of the break, including our front bench. They'll be with me in just a few moments. Stay right there.
On Sunday, I had a conversation with an individual that I've known for many years who recorded it without my knowledge and had it leaked to a gun lobbyist.
The Minister of Public Safety accidentally told the truth, and he was recorded doing it. He said that the gun grab is not worth the money.
Why are the Conservatives against keeping guns off our streets, and why has this leader of the opposition voted against every single gun control measure that he's been in Parliament for?
That minister did have a real conversation about guns. Unfortunately for him, he was caught on tape. Why is it that Liberals only tell the truth when they don't think anyone is listening?
The Public Safety Minister in the hot seat today after a leaked recording of him surfaced in a Toronto Star report. In the audio, Minister Anita Anand said he doubts local police will have the resources to enforce the Liberals' mandatory gun buyback program and says the reason the Prime Minister is sticking with the policy is to appease voters in Quebec. This isn't the first time the Public Safety Minister, just a handful of months into the job, is facing scrutiny, though. Earlier, it was over letters he wrote on behalf of a Sri Lankan national who was previously denied permanent residence due to what the CBSA considered a protracted involvement with the LTTE, a terrorist organization. And the minister now has an ethics screen around national security files involving the Tamil community. We've got to talk to the front bench about this. With me this evening, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant. He's the CEO of Space Canada now. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is here. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is with us, as is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody.
Hey,
nice to see you. Benzie, I'll start with you. We got an extended statement from the Office of Minister Ananda Sangri essentially saying I make a point to speak with Canadians who don't support our approach, to listen to their concerns, and to ensure they understand their options in this voluntary buyback program. In trying to address this individual's frustrations, my comments were misguided. He then goes on to reiterate the government's and his own support for the program. Your thoughts on, is this minister's days numbered in this portfolio, do you think?
I think they are. My colleague Mark Ramsey broke this story this morning, Bashi, and when I saw Mark's report, I thought, Gary is a mixture of Inspector Clouseau and Mr. Magoo. I'm going to date myself with those ancient references, but he is the minister who literally can't shoot straight. I'm astounded he's still on the job. He's accident prone, gaffe prone. And this is really embarrassing when he's telling his tenant, who's also his friend by the sound of the conversation on the weekend, that he'll personally reimburse him for the cost of the gun if need be. I guess he's a good landlord, but I'm not really sure that's how government ministers should behave. I'm astounded that Prime Minister Carney I'm surprised he stuck with them this far, Vashi, but I cannot see them sticking with him too much longer, especially when a lot of what he said, Pierre Poilievre is not wrong. That is the truth. Why is the government doing this? Because it does sell well in Quebec. And I think that's Gary's not wrong, but Pierre Poilievre is correct. When you tell the truth like that and you're caught, boy, it's hard to come back from it.
We did reach out, Tom, to the Prime Minister's office to see if they had anything to add or wanted to say anything about the minister's future in that portfolio, and they said that they just referred us to the statement from the minister's office. Your thoughts on the way this is going down and the significance of it happening around this program in particular, which has always been, kind of fraught with issues?
Yeah. I agree with most of what Benzie just said, but I will take a very strong disagreement with both what Anita Anand said and what Robert Benzie just said about Quebec. Quebec is the only province in Canada that has a gun registry.
Yeah, that's true.
It was saved after it was scuppered by the Conservatives under Stephen Harper across the country. Lo and behold, there was a copy that existed. And under Philippe Couillard, Quebec was able to keep that gun registry, and that's what people cared about. I have to tell you, it sounds like total malarkey. Blame it on Quebec. I've never, ever seen or heard any orchestrated, organized push about this buyback program in Quebec, because the most important thing, which is making sure that, when a police officer goes to a signaling of a domestic dispute in a rural area, they know whether or not there are guns behind the door. Now, they're going to be careful in any event, but boy, does that ever give them a leg up to have that information, and Quebec's the only place where they have it. So that's the part, honestly, that really bugged me, because I know Gary. I got a chance to travel with him once, and he's just such a gentleman. But this is lousy politics, because he's trying to scapegoat another province on something, and it literally, Vashi, it's a non-issue in the province of Quebec, because the main issue, the registry, has been taken care of. So on that score, there I agree with Benzie. Bye-bye, Gary. There's no way that somebody who can say stuff like that gets to stick around.
Well, Brian, the program is supposedly, according to this leaked audio, also like a new pilot, and there have been other pilots that's going to be launched this week. It's maybe not the issue in Quebec that Minister Anand makes it out to be, but it is an issue in lots of rural parts of the country where they didn't like the way that this all unfolded and they felt worried. There are police forces now who have said that they won't enforce it. If your public safety minister is on the record, essentially, not through his own choice, but otherwise, as saying he doesn't fully endorse the program, can he sell it?
Yeah, it'd be pretty difficult to do that, wouldn't it? I think that's the big issue here, and giving any sort of reason as to why such a policy is being put in place, that it's politically driven, is the real problem. I'll leave it to Tom and his analysis in Quebec. Certainly, he's on the ground there, so whether he's right in his political analysis or not, I don't think that really matters. I think what matters is the fact that he's not defending it in this closed meeting. And to your point, that certainly undermines his ability to do it publicly moving forward. So, look, I think if they wanted to get rid of him, they might have done it already today. Maybe they're going to see how this goes, and if it lasts long, they may also tell themselves, look, this is one policy issue, a big one, don't get me wrong, but one policy issue amongst many others. If he can sort of, hopefully, from their point of view, be able to navigate the next few days with the pilot announcement that was referenced in this story, then maybe they'll give him a shot. I don't know that. I'm just trying to sort of sense what they might be thinking in that office at the moment. But yeah, to your point, it becomes very difficult. And look, people, I think, want to be able to talk to politicians and be able to say their things, and they want to hear what the person really thinks. But if you don't really support one of the key programs, then there's a real problem, right? And I think if it's to the point that maybe you're a little agnostic on a program, or maybe it's not something you would have done exactly like that, that happens. That happens to all ministers. It happens to prime ministers and premiers too, by the way. But you still have to be on board with defending it, especially when it's something that had been in the public eye for so long. So that's certainly a tough spot to be in for him moving forward.
Yeah, and just so that for full transparency, like what was reported by Rob's colleagues, Lisa, wasn't, I can understand certainly if he had gone, like Brian says, it's a great point, and said, like, I understand your concerns, I even sympathize with some of them, I'm going to bring them back and make sure that I raise them, but this is the program as it is. Like, he said things like, I also don't understand the logic. Like Rob pointed out, he offered to pay the difference himself to the tenant. Like, there are some pretty specific, more incriminating things than just saying, like, I hear you, man.
Yeah, what makes this whole thing lethal to his career and continuation as a cabinet minister is that he breached cabinet confidentiality, cabinet cohesion, cabinet solidarity. Once a decision is made in the cabinet, that's it. If you try to go against it and you lost, well, you lost, but you still have to carry the message out there. What I find interesting, though, is, in the past, I guess what would have happened in other governments is that the individual who got caught like this would offer their resignation to the prime minister, and the prime minister would say yes or no. At the beginning of my career, you may have noticed that happened a lot, quite frankly. Luckily, Stephen Harper did not take my resignation the times that I had to give it over. All that being said, it is in the hands of the prime minister now. It won't be forgotten. When there is a shuffle, I think Gary is going to be moved somewhere else. And the other part, too, Vashi, to remember is there's an awful lot of backbenchers who are saying, I could do much better in that job. Give me a chance, boss. Put me in.
Cutthroat. Okay. I got to take a quick break. The front bench is sticking around. We're back with our one-on-one with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and why he doesn't believe in magic. We'll talk about that. One more question, if you'll permit me, on another vote that you're going to face, and that's the leadership review in January. Do you have a magic number?
No, I don't believe in magic.
Do you have a number at which you think you need in order to remain as leader?
I don't, no.
Why not?
I'll be working to win over the people of the Conservative Party who will be there, and our message will be that I'm the leader that will bring forward the Canada that will restore the promise of the country.
Should I take anything, though, away from the fact that you don't want to put a number on it, as far as a lack of confidence that you'll be able to secure the full support of your party?
No.
Then why won't you put a number on it?
Because the people will decide, and then you'll see the number.
It was so long in the works and so long since we'd interviewed Mr. Poilievre that it jumped right over what I was saying. That was part of our interview over the weekend with the federal Conservative leader, the first one since he became leader of the party. In that exchange, you heard us reference the the leadership review, that will take place in January in Calgary. I want to bring back the front bench to talk a little bit about that and how that review might inform the Conservative strategy over the next few months. We've got Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie here. Lisa, I'll start with you. I know that he didn't want to put a number on it. I don't think there's many Conservatives out there who don't think he will pass that leadership review. How do you think, though, that review will inform what happens between now and then?
Well, he's going to win, and he's going to win handily. And I think the danger of putting a number is you don't want to give a number that's so high that you seem overconfident, but so low that you're inviting people to think, well, maybe I should be looking at him twice. So I can understand why he doesn't want to put a number out there. In fact, I don't think any leaders want to put numbers out there before they start, except Mark Carney. He seems to like setting targets all the time that he doesn't actually meet, and that's problematic, as you can see. So what's it going to mean in terms of moving forward? I think moving forward, it's going to culminate in a big check mark that Pierre's the person that's going to take them into the next election. He's going to have their full support, and away they go. And that's just basically what's going to happen in January. Remember, it's in Calgary and it's cold, and I don't know whether or not everybody's going to show up. And Ontario is having their conference at the same time. So lots of things to say why you don't necessarily get a big turnout, but that may not necessarily be too bad.
Do you think, Brian, it ends up informing the strategies or the policies, though, that the leader or the party take, again, between now and then? There's sort of like two different ways to look at it. On immigration, for example, lots of what they're proposing right now is not what they proposed during the election. At the same time, you know, Mr. Poilievre is doing mainstream media interviews, not something that you would say necessarily would be directly aimed at appealing to your base. So how do you think this might inform, or the leadership review in and of itself might inform their strategy?
I think it will inform their strategy, but let me start by saying last week I said he should do more long-form interviews, and then he did one. So I certainly would like to think he was watching our panel, taking our advice. But I thought he did well, by the way. I think he's better in that format than maybe he gives himself credit for. And I think I don't believe in magic. It kind of reminds me of Chrétien. It doesn't address the question whatsoever, but you sort of chuckle. It becomes the headline, and you sort of forget what the question was. So he handled it all quite well. And I agree with Lisa's points and challenges of putting a number on it. And to your question, yes, I think it will inform what they do over the next little while. I'll take Lisa's analysis. If he feels quite confident about it, then maybe not as much. But to be sure, you don't want to show up and have any surprises. He will have a tendency to want to go a little more right, try to appease more to the right wing of the party that are probably the ones that will show up if there is a lower turnout at the leadership review convention. Then he'll certainly want those that are full of energy, those that are more willing to kind of come to one of those events to think that he's doing a good job. And going a little more to right on some policies may indeed make sense for that part of his political journey over the next few months. I'm not sure that's what he needs to do to try to do better when it comes to a federal election. But there you go with the balance that he's going to have to strike moving forward.
Tom, what do you think?
Well, I note with great interest that all of a sudden he does like these mainstream interviews on the media, like the one that you had with him over the weekend. And I think that for him politically, that's a good thing. He thought that he could do this alone. He and Jenny Byrne were just going to snub all the mainstream media. They were going to do podcasts. They were going to do little select things with people who think the same way he does. Well, that's not the way you add in politics. And Pierre Poilievre is starting to figure that out. He has changed. We've talked about it last week. His return to the House has seen a slightly milder tone. That interview, I think, is another example of his ability to communicate complex ideas. And yes, he's going to get a big number. I'm with Lisa on this one. In January, in Calgary, he's going to get a big number for the support. But the best way to make sure that that number is great is to ensure that he has support across the country and to raise his numbers vis-a-vis Mark Carney and to make sure that people like him more. And so he's got to do both at the same time. He's got to be able to, move forward, pushing and pulling and bringing the thing, not just pushing people away that he doesn't like, bringing people into the tent. The guy who brought me into politics, a fellow named Claude Ryan, a wonderful man, always said to me, Mr. Mulcair, in politics, you got to remember, you're always looking to add, not to subtract. Poilievre has tried the subtraction thing. He's a subtractionist. He's a good artist at that. Now he's finally starting to learn, because there must be people around him giving him that message, and maybe he's figured it out on his own as well. You've got to start adding, and I think that that's what this is about.
Last word to you on this, Benzie.
Yeah, Vashi, I agree with Tom and Brian on this. I think the fact of the interview, and you did a great job, by the way, in question period yesterday with Poilievre, the fact of that interview it was almost news in itself. It shows that he has learned something from that humiliating April election defeat. Remember, on New Year's Day, Mr. Poilievre's party led the Liberals by 28 percentage points. They thought they could steamroll to victory without the mainstream media, and they failed to remember that the people who actually vote watch CTV, watch CBC, read The Star, read The Globe. These are educated people who are watching the show right now who are interested in the affairs of the day. They want to see what leaders have to say. And I thought it was so stupid for Poilievre's campaign to not allow the media on their campaign plane. They only had 4 questions a day from reporters that they selected. Sometimes you had some seriously fringe outlets asking questions, while mainstream outlets that reach millions of Canadians were shut out. It was a moronic strategy, and for that alone, they deserve to blow the 28 percentage point lead that they blew. So I think he's learned from that, and having an interview with you and taking some tough questions, it was good for him. It was good for public discourse. That's what Canadians want from their leaders.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Thanks, guys. Appreciate the conversation tonight. As always, Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie, our front bench. I want to turn to an update for a big story that we actually covered with, I believe it was our Thursday front bench last week. Lisa was there. Jimmy Kimmel is heading back on air tomorrow night. His show, of course, was suspended by ABC last week after comments he made about the suspect in the murder of Charlie Kirk. Those comments had angered Donald Trump and others who support Donald Trump, and the FCC chairman, a Trump appointee, was among them. ABC is the parent company of Disney and released a statement about this decision to bring Jimmy Kimmel back, saying it's a decision we made because we felt some of the comments were ill-timed and thus insensitive. We have spent the last days having thoughtful conversations with Jimmy. So we will, of course, stay tuned for any reaction to that decision. But breaking news this hour, Jimmy Kimmel will be back on air tomorrow. Coming up, we'll take a look at the state of trade talks between Canada and the United States as the CUSMA review officially begins. What strategy should this country be employing? Former Canadian ambassador to the U.S., Derek Burney, and Justin Trudeau's former deputy chief of staff, Brian Clow, will be here together after a short break.
This is not a transition, this is a rupture. This is a sharp change in a short period of time, driven by a variety of factors. We have a determination to rise up and meet this, but we agreed a comprehensive approach within the context of USMCA, but a comprehensive approach with Mexico to deepen our bilateral trading relationships, and we are pursuing more aggressive strategies throughout Asia.
To Power Play, the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Free Trade Agreement, CUSMA as it's known, is officially up for review. That process just started, while punishing tariffs on steel, aluminum, autos, and forestry are still there. So what's our best strategy heading into that review? Derek Burney was Canada's ambassador to the U.S. and chief of staff to former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. And Brian Clow was deputy chief of staff to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the lead on the Canada-U.S. file. Both are with us this evening together. Hi, thanks so much for making the time. It's great to see you both. I appreciate it.
Great to be here.
Brian, I'm going to start with you. And in particular, against the backdrop of this CUSMA review, which we knew would be happening, there's a formal process, but also there's a lot of politics around it. Like, how do you think that will have an impact, or will it at all have an impact on our desire to see these sectoral tariffs, the really punishing thing, go away?
Yeah, I feel with every passing week more pessimistic about this process. Both tracks, the Canada-U.S. talks that are supposedly underway and the CUSMA review that's now starting, it's clear the Trump administration feels emboldened. They feel they're winning. And I think they're going to give Canada a really hard time as this CUSMA review unfolds. I think the country and the government should prepare for a long and at times painful process.
Do you think, Derek, do you have a similar instinct that Trump doesn't see any negatives right now to keeping these tariffs, in particular on the sectors I mentioned on? And do you think ultimately we're in for a long battle?
Very much with what Brian just said. We need to be very wary of entering into a negotiation with an administration that already is thrown out the one we have and violated every known principle of international trade. So this is not an easy challenge. It may be better to talk than not to talk, but I don't know what progress, if any, we've made in the discussions we've had with the Americans thus far. So I'm very skeptical. I'm very wary. I don't trust this administration. I don't think anybody should.
Derek brings up a good point, Brian, about just sort of like, I think the larger question Canadians have, which is, okay, we embark on a renegotiation of CUSMA, which right now, by the way, the fact that it exists is basically saving our economy, like other than the parts that have been so unfortunately and terribly hit. Like, is there any way to engage in negotiations with someone who is not a good faith partner?
Well, this is the challenge that the government is experiencing right now. It's, as I said, they think they're winning, they're emboldened, and they want to cause pain from Canada. They see it as a zero-sum game. They're trying to gain from us, and therefore, as I said, I'm pretty pessimistic about where this goes.
And let me follow up with you, because you were such a big part, and I'll ask Derek the same question, both of you big parts of the renegotiation of NAFTA, I guess, first time around, just a number of years ago. Like, was that the sense then, or did you feel like, you know, it was not exactly a zero-sum game or perceived that way?
We were pretty nervous back then, too. I don't want to say it's that much different than it was back then. We had a president threatening to rip up NAFTA, withdraw, and he did that constantly. And we felt at certain times in those talks that he actually was going to do it. It was difficult then. It's going to be difficult now. And despite my pessimism, my advice to the government is they've got to stay strong, prepare for the long haul, try not to give ground, try to get to some sort of outcome. And the one silver lining to all of this is at least there is a process to talk to them. Dominic LeBlanc, Ambassador Hillman will be sitting down with USTR Greer and Howard Lutnick, and that's a good thing. They'll at least be talking.
We know that the last time around that I was referencing, Derek, a lot of what worked for us was this so-called Team Canada approach that was not just about dealing with the White House, right? With all different levels of government, there were people, former, current, different, you know, premiers employed to try and make that a reality. You and I have spoken before about how much less pressure there appears on Donald Trump this time around to do things that make economic sense. Have you seen any discernible difference? Do you still think that there could be any difference throughout this process if we still decided to employ that kind of approach?
Well, I'll give you one example. There are 85 senators in the U.S. who want to increase sanctions against Russia, and yet nothing is happening. Why? Because they don't want to antagonize the president. He is all-powerful. As Brian well knows, a normal trade negotiation is a balance of give and take. With this administration, it's a unilateral take. All the giving is done by the negotiating partner. That's why it's going to be difficult. If I'm encouraged by anything of late, it's that it seems that Michael Sabia has been put in charge of this negotiation. That's a good thing. He's a professional, he knows his stuff, and he's tough-minded. And that's exactly what we need. We don't need more weenies dealing with the administration. We need somebody with some backbone.
And just for everyone watching who doesn't intimately know who Michael Sabia is, he's the clerk of the Privy Council, which is kind of like the top bureaucrat here in Ottawa. He's done a number of different roles in the public and private sector. But I do take your point. Not necessarily weenies, but I take your point. Brian, I also wanted to ask you about the different overall context with which this group is operating versus you, and that is that all these other countries have signed so-called agreements that agree to a base level of tariffs. I think I saw anywhere in the range from 10 to 19%. Does that continue to inform the position that Trump takes that, like, I'm winning? And ultimately, should we just confront a reality that, like, how are we going to get something much better?
So I'll answer in two parts. Yes, it makes it much more difficult for Canada than what we faced when Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland were leading the talks. Back then, the Western world, Europe, Japan, Mexico, Canada, were all somewhat aligned in the approach to the United States. They all retaliated and they all coordinated to a certain degree to push back. And it worked to a certain degree. This time, Canada was standing alone with China in retaliation, and that's one of the reasons Trump does feel that they are winning and feels emboldened. The fact that the UK, Europe, Japan have all agreed to some level of baseline tariff does make it more challenging for Canada. But my final point is Canada needs to work really hard to avoid any sort of across-the-board tariff. It would be far worse than what we currently have, and frankly, it would undo the CUSMA that we have.
Are you surprised, Derek, at the degree to which all these other countries, folded, I guess, for lack of a better term? And how do you think it will inform our negotiating position?
I was very surprised that the Europeans in particular folded without a fight. Japan, well, that's still going on, but Europeans were a real disappointment. They had the backbone, if they had the backbone, they had the size of market that the Americans have to be concerned about, but they folded like a cheap tent.
And how do you think that impacts our negotiating position?
Well, I think as I said earlier, I think our position is very difficult. I think we have to be very cautious. We need to get relief on the tariffs on aluminum and steel and the pressures on our auto sector. If we can't get any progress on those three fundamentals, then it's not worth the candle. We've got to start segregating ourselves from the U.S. market. We can no longer rely on it. We should be doing much more in Asia. We should be doing much more with Europe, and we shouldn't let Australia steal a major contract from China from us on canola. That just doesn't make any sense to me, and I don't know why we let it happen.
Brian, what was our just jumping off the first part of what Derek said? Like, what was our primary leverage in the round of negotiations you were a part of, and how do you think that contrasts from what leverage we have now? Like, what would you identify as the leverage we have in this round?
The leverage we had then still exists now. It is the fact that the United States and many U.S. companies benefit from the trade they do with Canada. And that's still there, but very different from when I was there and when Justin Trudeau was leading these talks, is the American business community is much quieter. Therefore, Congress is much quieter. And that's because, as we've seen, this U.S. president and his administration is just much more willing to punish their critics. And that's a huge difference. So it's not to say there's no leverage. Canada does have leverage. Some of those voices are there. I think they're communicating privately with the White House instead of publicly like they were before. But it's definitely different now.
Do we have any of those voices to lean on? Like, is there anybody you think will plead the case in the way that so many did in the last round?
Yeah, I think they are there, and they will act out of their own self-interest. Right. I read this week that John Deere laid off a whole bunch of people in Iowa because they're suffering from the tariffs. That kind of news is actually the best news for Canada and other countries in motivating the administration to try to come to some sort of resolution here.
Derek, I wanted to ask you about Mexico as well. Of course, the Prime Minister was there last week. A number of months ago, there were some comments from premiers about kind of going it alone on a bilateral basis with the United States leaving Mexico out of things. What do you think is the better strategy for Canada to pursue? Is it keeping Mexico in the fold or going it alone?
Oh, I think we should keep Mexico in the fold as long as they remain in the fold. They pulled the rug out from under us a couple of times in the past, and we shouldn't forget that. But there's no harm in speaking softly and sweetly to the Mexicans until we know what the real agenda is.
Brian, I'll give you the last word. Same question to you.
I completely agree. I chuckled seeing some of the coverage about and the reaction from Mexico about the comments made by Doug Ford, right, Chrystia Freeland, and others last fall. There are no angels in this. Countries act in their own interest. And as Derek said, Mexico went on their own, secretly talked to Donald Trump in the summer of 2018 and announced a bilateral deal. That put a ton of pressure on us. And it's something Donald Trump used to try to get more concessions out of Canada. So I don't judge them for that. Countries do what's in their interest. But it's definitely a good thing for us to be working constructively with Mexico.
There are no angels in this. That's what I'll leave it on. Brian Clow, Derek Burney, thank you very much to both of you. I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you very much.
And your insights. Okay, we'll take a quick break. More Power Play on the other end of that break. The Prime Minister continues his visit to New York City. He's at the UN General Assembly, of course, just ahead of that visit, declaring his support for recognizing a Palestinian state. We will have continued coverage and reaction to that declaration throughout the evening right here on CTV News Channel. I'm Vashi Kapelos. Thanks for watching Power Play. Have a great rest of your night.